When Maclean was preparing that report, presumably in October, early November 43, Tito probably had about 60,000 men. And Mihailovic probably had about the same mobile forces. But Mihailovic could call on 250,000 Serb peasants, partly trained and immediately available, who could be called up at once. Tito had no such reserve.
Probably it was an exaggeration, but I can't say, because there is nobody here really who had counted exactly how many partisans there were in the whole of Yugoslavia.
Mada je Mihailovićeve snage nemoguće odrediti kolike su. Zato što Mihailović nema jednu konstantnu, stalno organizovanu vojsku, nego on računa na one koje može mobilisati. Mihailović je, na primjer, u pojedinim delovima imao više snaga nego mi, ali to važi samo u nekim srpskim delovima, a ne u ostaloj Jugoslaviji.
The communists had a very good line on information, and I think they didn't lack anything behind Goebbels at all. And they had said they'd got a brigade here and a division there consisting of very, very few people. I mean, they'd got the framework and all that sort of thing. And you see, most of their people, they weren't volunteers, they were pressed men. I've seen them collect them too, and those that didn't want to come ran away and they were shot.
The figures we got from the partisans, the information, we took with a grain of salt. They were likely to be exaggerated, but I had with me Colonel Vivian Street, an extremely able regular soldier, and he went through their figures carefully with the partisan, with Tito's headquarters. And also, of course, there was Bill Deakin, now Sir William Deakin, a professional historian, and he had been there by the time I wrote my report for 6 months and had been involved in very heavy fighting indeed alongside the partisans, and had seen for himself how well they fought.
Maclean also stated that the communist partisans dominated the greater part of Yugoslavia.
Utterly ludicrous. I don't see how you can possibly have made that statement. I mean, half the country of Yugoslavia was Serbia. There were, as far as I know, very, very few partisan forces in Serbia.
In Serbia, and during Maclean's arrival in 43, there was a predominance of people loyal to Draza Mihailovic.
When we came out, BLOs and crashed air crews came from all over Serbia, from all directions. And we all converged on Pranjani, which was near Ravnogora, where Mihailovic's headquarters was, and where he was preparing an airfield to evacuate us. We all of us covered maybe 100, 150 miles, or some of them more, moving there. And to my knowledge, nobody encountered partisans on the way.
I had liaison officers in with a great many partisan formations in different parts of Yugoslavia, and I got their reports. And from them, I was able to tell how well the partisans, what a contribution they were making. As to Serbia, I think it's quite true that the partisans were relatively weak in Serbia at that time.
Maclean reported that using traditional guerrilla tactics, the partisans counted on losing not more than 1 man killed for at least 5 of the enemy. Savage reprisals by the Germans were not taken into consideration.
Tito never worried about reprisals. In fact, he welcomed them, because he got recruits from the devastated villages where the reprisals took place. Mihailovic, of course, was very concerned about the reprisals.
They requested him to blow up bridges, for example. And he'd say, well, I can blow up this bridge with no problem, because the bridge is guarded by 1 German soldier on each side of the bridge. But if I destroy the bridge and then I kill those Germans, they're going to take 1 in 10 or 100 of my men in the nearest villages, peasants, and kill all the male, those 2 Germans are dead, but they're going to replace that bridge within a week or 10 days. They're going to get their bridge back, but I'm not going to get my people back.
The Germans, in the beginning, would kill 5 Yugoslav people for 1 soldier, and then 10, and then 20, and then they'd wipe out a town. And in going to the airfield from where we were shot down, which was about 125 miles, we had to go through German territory, but we also went through small Yugoslav towns where the people absolutely loved Mihailovic. He was like their god. When we went through these towns, the people told us that they loved Mihailovic, that everyone in those towns and in that area supported Mihailovic 100%. And then I started to tell you, we got to Mihailovic, and he explained to us how costly it was. They would wipe out towns. We went through towns where we saw the machine gun holes on the buildings where they had lined the men and the women and shot them down because 1 or 2 Germans had been killed on patrol.
The partisans, which had been created from the original young refugees, Serb refugees who had escaped the Ustashi massacres in Croatia, people who had already lost their parents and everybody else, had nothing else in terms of family to lose, and they got involved in a guerrilla movement which was, of course, constantly mobile. So that if you did some action here, you skipped off to somewhere else, and whatever German reprisals were done against the local population, you actually didn't know about it, and certainly didn't care as much as those people to whom this happened locally.
I think what they tell me was that they were aiming at killing a large number of Germans for every man they lost. Of course, with fairly slender forces compared with what they were up against. They were bound to try and kill more Germans than they lost themselves, otherwise they'd have soon been wiped out.
Maclean stated that although Mihailovic may deny personal collaboration with the Axis forces, he could not deny the open and active collaboration of many of his principal commanders.
It's certainly true that Chetniks in various parts of Yugoslavia collaborated with the Germans and with the Italians. What seems to be unfounded is the idea that this was organised and planned by Mihailovic himself. A lot of people called themselves Chetniks who had only a very tenuous or no connection at all with Mihailovic. Only at the very end of the war, as his prospects were collapsing as the Germans fled, were there any contacts between Mihailovic and the Germans directly, and then he refused to collaborate with the Germans.
I saw them come back from where they've had a clash with the Germans, and they had injured men and dead men and everything else, and they wouldn't have those if they'd been collaborating with them.
This man was desperately in need of funds and supplies. If he was truly collaborating, as I've heard, why didn't he just take Americans? He had 500 of them. He could turn them over to Germans and get enough money there to support his army. His men were walking around shoeless.
The Germans didn't want to collaborate with Mihailovic because they considered him as a potential enemy.
What is quite certain is that quite a large number of his leading commanders were collaborating with the Germans and the Italians, and that is a historical fact.
Mihailovic's organization being organized on a voluntary basis, and which was, especially during the first 2 years of the war, were more of voluntary joining of certain local leaders. His power was not so strong that he could control everyone. Very often you could see in their mutual communication that they say, we don't want to listen to you, we're going to do whatever we want, no matter whether you're going to outcast us or not, because we are leaders and chiefs, absolute leaders in the regions that we are controlling. So Mihailovic for himself and the officers around him didn't make any serious agreement with the Germans. Nothing like what Tito did and his people in March of 1943.
3 senior delegates from Tito, including Velebit, who later became Deakin's main mentor and main teacher of alleged collaboration by Mihailovic. Velebit, Milovangelas, Tito's right-hand man, and Kocha Popovic, an Anglophobe partisan general, went to Sarajevo and Zagreb, where they were wined and dined by the Germans over a period of weeks, and worked out a deal, the object of which was to ensure partisan German cooperation to fight an eventual Allied landing. In exchange, the Germans were to help Tito take over the Sanjak, which was the western area of Mihailovic's area of influence. Now, that deal was never promulgated because Hitler blew up and said, "I won't deal with communist bandits." The British were just about to do so.